Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Sorry this is a late hits and losses video. I did a video on the readout from the Alaska summit last night, and my synopsis was it was a complete embarrassment, a complete capitulation to Putin. I've done a little more research. I'm going to add a little bit at the end of this video. It's even worse than I thought before. Like, the Russians are jumping with joy. The Ukrainians are really angry. And that itself is a total reflection of how it went. The Russians are jumping with joy. It is that embarrassing. Anyway, we'll start with the Ukrainian jump start figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course. You can find them linked in the description below. We've got 1,010 personnel lost, over 1,000 again. That could signify activities taking place in the Pokrovsk sector where the Ukrainians are pushing back the Russians. Sorry, my seat keeps depressing, what with learning so much about Alaska. Anyway, 6 tanks have been lost. That's a fair number. It's not above the daily average at all, but it's over halfway. 2 single AFVs, not very much there. 42 artillery systems, again almost double the daily average. A really good haul in that category. 137 vehicles and fuel tanks, fairly typical. I say fairly typical at being above 100, but actually it's been fluctuating quite wildly recently, going down well below 100 and then up again and then down. I think the Russians have been attacking the last few days quite a bit. There are a few videos. I don't have too much to show with you. There are a few tabs here, but many of them are just a quick romp through Pokrovsk. And then 2 pieces of special equipment. So those are the stats. Now, before we get on to Andrew Perpetua's loss list, just a bit to say on personnel. We have the pushback by the Ukrainians in the Dobropilya sector. Ukraine is stabilizing the Russian breakthrough near there, which leads to Pokrovsk in the Donetsk Oblast. The blue color on the map is the work of Ukrainian forces. The Azov fighters have killed 271 Russians now, apparently, destroyed a single tank, 37 vehicles and 3 artillery pieces. In other words, not a lot of equipment there. It's mainly infantry led, and that's what we kind of knew. So here's what the map looks like, and there is a potential for Russians to have been fully cut off in a couple of these, the couple of the prongs, the 2 prongs up from that salient. There were claims that the Russians had been cut off further down the neck of this sector, this salient, but I don't think that has happened. But the bridgehead is being pressured from both sides there, well, all 3 sides really. President Stewart says, could explain why most Russian channels haven't even mentioned this spot in the last 12 to 24 hours, which is an interesting observation, by the way. Reports from elsewhere along the front, but north of Pokrovsk is notably missing from most Russian assessments today. Wow. Okay, that's pretty indicative, I think, of what is going on there. Ukrainian unit claims Pokrovsk itself has been cleared of Russian saboteurs. So those are saboteurs that got into Pokrovsk. The Corps has claimed that Ukrainian units are operating inside of the city and civilians can move about, though travel within Pokrovsk remains heavily restricted. There were claims that Russians had got into Pokrovsk, were dressing in civilian clothes and were moving around. It's been quite difficult to flush them out, but apparently they have been flushed out of the Pokrovsk city itself. 7th Air Assault Corps reports that Ukrainian paratroopers have cleared Pokrovsk of Russian sabotage reconnaissance groups. Ukrainian troops are operating in the city where movement is heavily restricted through it, though access to Pokrovsk is still possible. But yeah, very difficult in that area. Now, just to reiterate the numbers from that Dobropilya sector, as you can see here, due to active operations in the core area of responsibility, the enemy suffered significant personnel losses, irrecoverable losses 271, sanitary losses 101, captured 13. The enemy also lost a significant amount of equipment and weaponry, destroyed and damaged a 1 tank, 2 AP armored fighting vehicles, 2 AFVs, 37 vehicles and motorcycles, and 3 pieces of artillery. Stabilization operations continue. Success was achieved thanks to coordinated and well-organized actions. The Corps Command thanks all units actively participating in this direction. So good news for the Ukrainians. Right, now let's look at losses for the Russians. We have the 14th and the 15th, even though the second one says the 14th, both say the 14th, the second one is the 15th. Here we have numbers are high. Here are the losses for the Russians 2 days ago. As you can see, massive amount of ATVs, not a lot of combat assets there. Ukrainians, more combat assets, although not a huge amount. Far less in general, but that's largely due to the ATVs listed on the Russian list there, and quite a few trucks as well, and a few more civilian vehicles. So when we come to the Ukrainian losses first, we have some artillery pieces, a couple of nondescript howitzers and other bits and pieces, single tanker T-80 damaged, a couple of BMPs damaged, a couple of AFVs damaged, an M113 damaged, and then most MRAPs damaged, but although two have been abandoned or captured, so irretrievably lost. Those are both Turkish provided Kirpis. And then down to a single ATV and a bunch of civilian vehicles, but not a huge amount. Tank decoy getting taken out as well there. Quite interesting to see that decoys are on the list quite regularly. They are doing their jobs. Right, for the Russian losses, we have some artillery pieces, D-30s and 20s mainly. 3 infantry fighting vehicles. Again, one's a BMP, a nondescript one is a BMP-3. So we are going to see more, as I keep saying, more BMP-3s on the list, because that's what they produce from new. And I don't think they are able to refurbish any of the older BMPs anymore. Single captured BTR-82, so that's good news for the Ukrainians capturing that. It is a zero-sum game in that respect. We've got quite a few trucks taken out, and we keep seeing that. So the Russians losing a fair number of trucks at the moment, and then ATVs, just motorcycles, e-scooters, quads, golf buggies, just a tremendous number of these. And it shows you how much they're using them to attack, and a lot of civilian vehicles too. Right, then we're going to go to yesterday's list, and we have a fairly similar looking list, although fewer ATVs from the Russians, and then the Ukrainians losing a few more civilian vehicles than the Russians. In fact, almost as many ATVs as well. And that's made the list look longer, a few more MRAPs too. So we discount the surveillance and comms equipment at the top, and the UGVs too. You're going to see a lot of those get it taken out. They are being used a lot. I've seen them used in offensive operations as well. I'm pretty sure I saw one with a grenade launcher having a go at a building as the Ukrainians were clearing out using the kind of combined arms warfare there that now includes UGVs. Anyway, artillery here, we've got a destroyed 2S-22 Bogdana. That is from a Lancet drone taking that one out. We're going to see more Bogdanas as they become proportionally more and more prevalent in the Ukrainian armed forces, as they are building them at a rate of knots. Single tanker T-64, single BMP damaged by for the Ukrainians there. MRAPs, quite a few MRAPs on the list. A lot of them nondescript, but then Cossacks, Senators, and Kirpis. Over half of them irretrievably lost. We've got 4 infantry mobility vehicles, Humvees and whatnot, and then down to quite a lot of civilian vehicles and a few motorcycles and quads as well. So the Ukrainians, well, it says here a ship. I don't know why this is in the Ukrainian one. Cargo ship Port Olia 4, taken out in unknown as to exactly how, although I think that there are some claims that 4 explosions, drones might have sunk that. I don't know why that's on the Ukrainian list. It probably should be on the Russian list there. We've got another picture of that to show you later. Right, okay, for the Russian losses for yesterday, we've got a bulldozer, a few bits of artillery. We've got 2 out of 4 of the tanks are track guard and shed, so not even being used as tanks really. One fell in a trench and then was hit by an FPV drone. We've got YPR 765. I presume that's a captured one then, if that is damaged, used by the Russians, because that is a Ukrainian. It's provided by the Dutch. It's a Ukrainian APC, so or infantry fighting vehicle. It is an M113 effectively. It's just been upgraded a little bit and usually has a bit of armament on the top, like a machine gun or whatever. So it comes just about under an IFV. Trucks, we have quite a few Kamals and Urals again. ATVs, a number of quads and motorcycles and buggies and whatnot, and then civilian vehicles. So I think on balance, it's probably over the 2 days, probably fairly equal, to be honest. Ukrainians losing more traditional combat assets, but that's, I think, because they have more of them to lose, to be honest. Right, so the enemy tried storming Kupiansk in the morning. 4 NTLBs and a tank tried to rush into the city along the highway from the first Liman side and land troops there, but the equipment was destroyed along with the troops. That's interesting, like a full-on assault of Kupiansk but with not a particularly large assault there. Not too many other videos really to talk about, or images or sources. Just one more. Zelensky. So the units of the 79th and 82nd Airborne Assault Brigades are operating very effectively in the Dobropilya direction. That's come from Zelensky himself. Today there was a decision on additional strengthening of the Pokrovsk direction and other directions in the Donetsk region. So he was at the headquarters to discuss that. So it's just a hint from Zelensky that Pokrovsk and Donetsk area is in need of strengthening, and they are going to do that. Okay, moving on to distant strikes. So last night with the Alaska summit, it appears that the Ukrainians didn't, and I was wondering whether this might happen. It could go one of two ways. Either you don't strike during the talks, because then it makes you look like you're belligerent and not really up for peace, or you do strike and you strike even harder. Now, what happened was, on the one hand, Russia struck last night, but it was completely what we've seen for the last 2 weeks, really, 3 weeks maybe. A small to middling size attack. I think that's the most they can achieve at the moment. It's my personal opinion. I think the Ukrainians have hit the supply lines and the manufacturing facilities of Shaheds such that the Russians are struggling to stockpile and send really massive waves. They probably would have done if they could have done, but they didn't, so they can't. They couldn't. You would if you could. Your answer, you can't. But for the Ukrainians, I think they didn't fire anything last night to try not to upset the apple cart. And I think that there's a difference in approach from the two nations, kind of with drones and missiles. That pretty much shows you, that's a reflection, I think, of the talks themselves, where the Russians have just waltzed in and made their normal demands that we've seen 100 times over. No change. Still going to attack the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians last night weren't even involved in the talks, but decided not to attack the Russians, because we want to make sure that we put our best foot forward. Russians didn't care. Overnight on August 16th, Russia launched 85 Shaheds and decoy drones and an Iskander-M ballistic missile at Sumy, Donetsk, Chernihiv and Dnipropetrovsk regions. Ukrainian defences downed or suppressed 61 of the 85 drones. A missile and 24 drones did hit 12 different locations, so the missile got through. I don't know if that was a missile from earlier in the day, because we did hear that a ballistic missile struck a residential area in Dnipro and in Pavlohrad and Dnipropetrovsk. So I don't think these numbers include what takes place during the daytime. So yesterday there were some ballistic missiles thrown at Ukraine throughout the day. We also do hear, and I have reported on this previously, that Russia's missile upgrades, that's to the Iskander-M and the KN-23, North Korean ones, are slashing Patriot interception rates, according to US intelligence. The Euromaidan press reports says new maneuvers and decoys make them harder to stop. Actually, it's coming from the war zone originally. A war media outlet. So that happened, but I don't have too much detail of what happened in Ukraine, and I have no details of strikes last night from Ukrainians. As mentioned, I don't think they did strike. There was quite a lot of information coming out of strikes that took place the night before, though, and we had more details that emerged yesterday, so we're going to go through some of that. But first, it's worth noting this came out a couple of hours ago, so it could be that the Ukrainians didn't attack last night, but decided to do so now that they know what has happened, or what indeed hasn't happened as a result of the Alaska summit. They have now maybe decided to attack during the day. So drone threat in Astrakhan, Volgograd, Rostov, Kursk regions and the North Caucasus. Missile threat in Donetsk. There's been the carpet plan implemented at airports in Astrakhan, Volgograd, Grozny and Vladikavkaz. So they have stopped incoming and outgoing flights in a number of airports, precisely because the Ukrainians are attacking with drones at the moment, potentially. No detail on that. Now, a fire has started out today at the oil refinery in Volgograd. Now, that is an oil refinery that was struck the other night, but fire had stopped subsequently. So you may be forgiven for thinking the Ukrainians have struck that again today. But it appears, or at least some of Russians claims, that that's not the case. The fire looks pretty substantial now. So reports indicate a fire at the Volgograd oil refinery in Russia. A number of different videos suggesting that from all sorts of different angles. So Tim White says, interesting developments in the Lukoil refinery in Volgograd again. Officials claim, so this could be the Russians claiming mishap, because they often claim mishap being a preferable explanation for any strikes. They'd rather say it's a mishap than the Ukrainians striking. So they don't like to give the Ukrainians credence. They'd rather make themselves look like Muppets, as in, you know, it was an accident, careless smoker, than give kudos to the Ukrainians. That's a calculation they make. So take it with a pinch of salt. But the Russians are saying that a fire broke out when they were dumping petroleum products before trying to repair tanks damaged in this week's drone attack. So in other words, a fire has broken out again in this Lukoil facility in Volgograd. Photos here. Started smoking again at lunchtime and now is in a spot of bother. Not looking good there for that refinery. Good news for the Ukrainians. No matter how it happened, how it started, good news for the Ukrainians. Now, we also are getting more information on the one that struck 2 nights ago. The Rosneft, it's the largest in the Rosneft system, the Syzran refinery. The main ELOU AVT6 unit was disabled. You can see a bit in a spot of bother. And several tanks were damaged. The plant produces a wide range of fuels, including jet fuel, and supplies the Russian military. Local gas stations have already limited fuel sales. This might be the one where there were a number of other chimneys on fire, but be warned, because a refinery that can be normal, can be chimneys flaring rather than being struck by anything untoward. But certainly that the fire with the big smoke in the middle, I think, suggests that it was hit with drones, and possibly one on the right as well. Anyway, images are showing some pretty strong destruction there. Significant damage to several storage tanks, as well as the AVT6. It's the main processing unit handling atmospheric and vacuum distillation, as well as secondary distillation and gasoline stabilization. So quite a lot of damage done to this, and that could, as described yesterday by Will Teal, that could result in that being out an awful lot longer than the more charitable analysts will state. Then remember, yesterday not only was this place hit, but you had the gunpowder factory called Elastic that was hit, and actually the destruction there was really bad. Russia's Ryazan region, the aftermath of the gunfire explosion at the Elastic plant there, footage from locals show massive damage. I mean, if you look at this, like fences completely blown over, like quite some way from the main factory. I mean, this must have been a severe explosion taking place here. There looks like destruction really quite a long way around this, like concrete pillars falling down, trees being absolutely flattened. I mean, this is a lot of destruction took place. Look at all those trees absolutely denuded of their foliage. So with nothing left of the workshop where the blast occurred, footage from locals shows massive damage. Preliminary reports cite a safety violation as a cause. 5 people were killed and at least 100 injured. Actually, I think it's more than that now. So death toll from the explosion at the Russian gunpowder plant Elastic in Ryazan region has risen up to 11. At least 10 more people are missing. 130 people are injured. This was a horrific, incident. Whether it was struck by drones, I don't know that we know 100%, but it's happening at times of war. It's suspicious that one assumes it's not going to be a careless smoker. And then we also heard yesterday about this ship, Port Olya 4 in Astrakhan, that has sunk, and now we have some more footage of the sunkenness of the ship here. And I was wondering whether they'd be able to salvage some of the equipment on it, but it looks like they didn't try and take it off, that it sank. And this was carrying components from Iran for Shahed drones, but also ammunition by all accounts. And that's exactly the sort of ship you would like to see go down, carrying exactly the sort of cargo you'd like to see disappeared. Right, Tim White says, by the way, Miguel71 on Twitter reminded me of a fire in a port nearest to the Crimean Bridge. This is nothing I'd known about. So apparently there's been a fire at Taman, which is really close to the Crimean Bridge. And that's been on fire for 3 days, according to, he says, NATO's monitoring site. I think he means NASA. The NASA firm's data showing that Taman has been in a spot of bother for 3 days, and actually we've not reported that. However, no news has been expressed on the attack. Ukraine hasn't claimed it, and the Crimean Wind, which is a pro-Ukrainian Crimean channel, also says nothing is verified. So something to watch out for. But a port area, it has been on fire for 3 days in Crimea and near to the Kerch Bridge. Okay, now we're going to move on to what the hell took place last night. And I just want to show you this image first, because this is, like I've said, Americans should be deeply embarrassed. I mean, if there's a single image that reflects the American capitulation or the Trumpian capitulation to Putin, it's this. As Adam Kinzinger, the former Republican congressman, says, wonder what Fox News would be talking about all day this week if Obama had done this. So what you have are 3 American soldiers on their hands and knees laying out a red carpet for Putin at the bottom of Putin's plane. Now, lots of people have already started satirizing this. You've already got images, cartoons coming out of this. America, is it great again? As you've got the bloodied hands of Putin walking down off the plane, his shirtless Putin, and the American soldiers on their hands and knees laying out the red carpet. Jake Bro says Trump literally had uniformed active duty soldiers on their hands and knees rolling out the red carpet for a genocidal dictator who has killed millions of people around the world the last 26 years. America has fallen. So some people interpreting this very badly. In fact, here's another one, true story. Remember this, guys? The raising of the American flag at, was it Ichinawa or whatever? I don't mean whatever. I mean, I can't remember the exact name. Okinawa. Sorry. This is them now on their hands and knees in front of Putin's plane. So that kind of sums up what happened. Now, I'm going to run you through a bunch of things to add to my video this morning. Please go and watch my video this morning. No analysis has changed there. It's only got worse. And if you want to know exactly how badly it went last night, don't just think. So a couple of you are saying, oh, I've got Trump derangement syndrome. I'm too biased in the way I interpret it. It's like, I'm interpreting this really similarly to loads of people, right? And also to the Russians and the Ukrainians, right? So if you don't believe me, let's listen to the Russians and let's listen to the Ukrainians to see what they think. Okay, Russia's reaction to Donald Trump's summit with Vladimir Putin in Alaska has been nothing short of jubilant, says Pyotr Sauer, the journalist, with Moscow celebrating the fact that the Russian leader met his US counterpart without making concessions and now faces no sanctions despite rejecting Trump's ceasefire demands. Quote, the meeting proved that negotiations are possible without preconditions, wrote former President Dmitry Medvedev. More from him in a second, because he lays out how freaking embarrassing the whole thing was from a Russian point of view, how bloody brilliant it was. He said that on Telegram. He added that the summit showed that talks could continue as Russia wages war in Ukraine. Trump entered the high-stakes summit wanting, quote, I won't be happy if I walk away without some form of ceasefire. Well, he's got no ceasefire, and he says it's a 10 out of 10 meeting, so he's self-owned there, and threatening, quote, severe consequences if Moscow refused to cooperate. Well, they've refused a ceasefire, and they haven't got serious consequences, severe consequences. But after the 3-hour meeting with the Russian side that yielded no tangible results, Trump shelved his threats and instead insisted that the meeting was extremely productive, even as Putin clung to the maximalist demands for ending the war and announced no concessions on the battlefield, where Russian forces are consolidating key gains in eastern Ukraine. And the Ukrainians, so the Russians have said this is amazing and they're jubilant. The Ukrainians have labelled the summit as a, quote, useless meeting. Agence France Presse has been speaking with some ordinary Ukrainians, albeit ordinary ones, but actually I just heard a Ukrainian MP pretty much saying the same on LBC. Ordinary Ukrainians have given their view of the summit, and it's fair to say they are pretty unimpressed. Pavlo Nabarev stayed up until the middle of the night in Kharkiv, which has suffered repeated Russian bombardments, to wait for the press conference. The 38-year-old theatre manager said, I saw the results I expected. I think this is a great diplomatic victory for Putin. He has completely legitimised himself. Nabarev, like many Ukrainians, was gobsmacked the meeting could take place without representatives of his country. Quote, this was a useless meeting. Issues concerning Ukraine should be resolved with Ukraine and with the participation of Ukrainians. The president, Olya Donyek, 36, It ended with nothing. All right, let's continue living our lives here in Ukraine, she said. Whether there are talks or not, Kharkiv is being shelled almost every day. Kharkiv definitely doesn't feel any change. A 50-year-old photographer, Irina Derkach, says, we believe in victory. We know it will come, but God only knows who exactly will bring it about. Derkach, like many Ukrainians, was suspicious of Trump. Quote, we do our job and don't pay too much attention to what Trump is doing, she added. Pharmacist Larisa Melnik said, I don't think there'll be a truce, she said, told AFP, adding that even if the guns fell silent, it will only be temporarily. Zelensky warns Russia may be stepping up attacks in the coming days. Wouldn't surprise me at all. Poland's president, actually it's the Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, has warned the battle for Ukraine's future and European security has reached a decisive phase. Putin has once again proven to be a cunning and ruthless player. Therefore, maintaining the unity of the entire West is so important. Today, it is even clearer that Russia respects only the strong. And the coalition of the willing leaders are to meet on Sunday, according to French president's office. They will meet, that's tomorrow, so that's obviously a very quick turnaround there for them meeting. Okay, so what else do we know? This is fascinating. So this is Fox News reporting pretty much at the time. Fox News reporter Jackie Heinrich. Honestly, this is an interesting tell. This is an interesting readout.
Happened back there. It was just very unusual, atypical, and I think we're all awaiting, the readout, because the way that it felt in the room was not good. It did not seem like things went well. And
so this is a proper reporter, right? This is not Sean Hannity, an infotainment guru, sitting in a room and massaging Trump's ego, asking softball questions. This is an actual reporter saying it felt bad in the room. The readout was this was bad. And if that's coming from a Fox reporter, take frickin' note.
It seemed like Putin came in and steamrolled, got right into what he wanted to say, and got his photo next to the president and then left. Of course, that is only the piece of the picture that we have right now, and certainly President Trump, who is the host and who is the president, would not want to, I think, enable something that would make him look weak.
I wonder if she'll end up being kicked off the network, because that's a brutal synopsis.
But we are eagerly awaiting to hear the background on that. And I will also note that we didn't see any sort of scowls on the faces of the likes of Steve Witkoff or Secretary Rubio or any of the other members of the U.S. delegation. And I think had it been concerning, we might have seen something there. But just to paint a picture for you of in the room, how it felt, what we're wondering about, what we need to know to put the pieces together and fully understand what we all just witnessed.
So she's like, Putin steamrolled Trump, and it felt bad in the room. This is Arnold Schwarzenegger going to freaking town on it.
President Trump, I just saw your press conference with President Putin, and it was embarrassing. I mean, you stood there like a little wet noodle, like a little fanboy. I mean, I was asking myself, when are you going to ask him for an autograph or for a selfie or something like that? I mean, you literally sold out at this press conference our intelligence community, our justice system, and worst of all, our country. You're the president of the United States. You shouldn't do that. I mean, what's the matter with you? I mean, whatever happened to the strong words or to the strength of Ronald Reagan when he stood there at the Berlin Wall and he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall? What happened to all that?
He's done one of my size. That's so often how I feel. And he absolutely excoriated Trump. That's a former Republican governor. Mehdi Hassan says, childlike behaviour from Trump. The guy told him exactly what he wanted to hear, and our narcissistic, thin-skinned, insecure leader lapped it up and then repeated it back to the state TV stenographers. Hard to fully comprehend how gullible and easy manipulated Trump is. Amazing. And that's amazing, not in a good way. Here we have Medvedev. So Medvedev's readout from the Putin-Trump summit. Honestly, just wow. So initial results, Alaska meeting, initial results, says the Russian. Full-scale, high-level talks between Russia and US have been restored, calm, without ultimatums or threats. In other words, there were no threats or ultimatums given to Russia. Russia were able to go in, have calm discussions with Trump, and not receive any pushback at all. I mean, that's highly, highly irresponsible from the US there straight away. 2, the Russian president personally and in detail presented Russia's conditions for ending the conflict in Ukraine to the US president. No pushback from the US. We get to sit down and we get to make these outrageous demands to the Americans. After nearly 3 hours of talks, the White House chief declined to escalate pressure on Russia, for now at least. Then what happens is the Americans don't put any pressure on the Russians. There are no severe consequences. There are no sanctions. This is what the Fox News reporter was saying, talking about steamrolling. Now, she was talking about in the room at the press conference. It seemed like Trump was steamrolling. But here, like, that's the idea of the actual 3.5 hour talk, or 3 hour talk. Importantly, says Medvedev, the meeting showed the negotiations are possible without preconditions and can take place while the special military operation continues. In other words, he's saying, it's brilliant. We can have these negotiations while still having a war. We don't have to have a ceasefire. Ukrainians are like, we have a ceasefire, then we do negotiations. Medvedev is shouting about how wonderful it is that they don't have to do a ceasefire. They can keep killing Ukrainians while stringing out these talks that have no preconditions. There are no preconditions. It's freaking brilliant. Of course it's brilliant for you. It's exactly what you want. And most importantly, he says at the end, both sides directly place responsibility for future progress in talks to end hostilities on Kiev and Europe. So most importantly, the US and Russia say it's up to Kiev now and Europe, but it's up to Kiev to agree to our proposals. Absolutely staggering. Now, RBC are reporting that Putin, instead of an immediate ceasefire, is trying to immediately realise all his political ambitions regarding Ukraine. So instead of having to do a ceasefire, he's literally like, this is amazing. Let's try and get everything. Everything we wanted, that's what we're going to try and get. There's no preconditions, no demands for a ceasefire. They've agreed to land swaps. I mean, this is freaking brilliant. All my Christmases have come at once. Quote, there were serious expectations that following the meeting in Alaska, it would be possible to agree on a ceasefire. But the Russian president spoke out against this. And there we're at. No ceasefire, because the Russian president spoke out against it. And the US didn't push back. First, we ceasefire. Then we move to negotiations. This is Ukraine's position. That's the advisor to the head of the OP, the Office of the President. First, we have a ceasefire. Then you do negotiations. But that's not what at all was agreed last night. Now, Emmanuel Macron has announced a meeting of the so-called coalition of the willing soon. That's actually tomorrow, saying any lasting peace must come from firm security guarantees. He welcomed the US readiness to contribute. So the one single good thing that came out of last night's meeting was that it appears the US might be on board with security guarantees in some way. That is significant. Don't underemphasize the importance of that. But it could be very small. But that's what the coalition of willing have been wanting. They need some kind of backstop from the US. So Macron has stressed the need to learn from the past 30 years of Russia consistently breaking its promises. Yeah. Coalition of willing will work with the US on security guarantees for Ukraine, says Macron. Again, that's significant, working with the US on security guarantees. CNN reports that European officials and Trump discussed US backing for security guarantees for Ukraine. Article 5 style model outside NATO as a part of a potential peace deal is under consideration. That would be great. A European official said the guarantees would come from Europe and the US, but NATO itself would not be involved. So not a NATO Article 5 invocation, but kind of a series of bilateral or trilateral or, multilateral agreements rather than an actual NATO agreement. Now, Trump sounds exhausted and broken as he babbles about the Russia hoax a minute and a half into his statement. Trump goes on to call Putin the boss. I just want you to understand that Trump called Putin the boss at a press conference after a negotiation with Putin. He called him the boss. It is that bad. It is that bad. We'll listen to just a little bit.
Mr. President, that was very profound. And I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting.
So on and so forth. But as it mentions there, you know, a minute and a half into the statement, he goes on about the Russia hoax, which he then repeats in the Hannity interview. So this is just an excuse for Trump's conspiracy theories to be given validation by the very person who was responsible for interfering with the US election. Just going to the criminal, to the perpetrator, who's obviously going to be saying, yeah, you were done in that election, and you know it's a rigged election and a Russia hoax, and going, look, it's wonderful. He said that it was all a hoax. Of course, he's going to say that. It's just absolutely unbelievable. This is like the Helsinki. Someone's saying that this is like the Helsinki conference, press conference on steroids. That this is just, it's terrible. And then you have this. And what I advise you do is read the transcript rather than listen to Trump. I've talked to you about his syntax and the way he puts his sentences together, and the fact that he interrupts himself and changes the subject, like from a technical grammatical point of view, from sentence. It's sometimes mid-sentence, but often from sentence to sentence, so that you can't. Your brain has to do an awful lot of work to keep understanding what he's talking about. But this is just a rambling, absolute rambling mess.
So you said before the interview, you said, in 2 minutes, I will know. I watched very closely when you met him on the red carpet after both your planes landed. What vibe did you get in 2 minutes?
Well, you know, I always had a great relationship with President Putin, and we would have done great things together in terms of, you know, their land is incredible. The rare earth, the oil, gas, everything, it's incredible. It's the largest piece of land in the world as a nation by far. I think they have 11 time zones, if you can believe it. That's big stuff. But we would have done a lot of great things, but we had the Russia hoax, which stopped us from doing that. We would have done so great, but
he's waxing lyrical about an imaginary relationship that he would have had with Putin and that the US would have had with Russia had the Russia hoax not got in the way. Like, he fundamentally does not understand Russia. He just fundamentally does not understand Russia.
We had one of the great hoaxes. I mean, there were others, like the election itself, as you know, as you covered better than anyone. And
got sued for.
It was a rigged election and a
paid
horrible thing that took place
$788 million.
in 2020. But we would have had a great relationship, but we did amazingly well considering, you know, he would look and see what happened. He would think we're crazy, you know, with the made-up Russia hoax. So we had something very important, and we had a very good meeting today, but we'll see. I mean, it's, you know, you have to get a deal. We agreed on a lot of points. I want to see people stop dying in Ukraine, and that's what's happening. We're losing 5, 6, 7,000. They're Russians, mostly Russians, and they're Ukrainian soldiers. There's some people dying in cities and towns where they're trying to blow up missile manufacturers and other things in some cities. I don't know if you know what's going on there, but they're
so. I hadn't clocked this before. That is fascinating. So going back to our discussion we often have, which is, are the Russians sometimes trying to fire at legitimate targets and end up killing civilians, or do they sometimes try and kill civilians? And the conclusion that we generally come to is it's both. Like, there will be times when electronic warfare and air defenses send missiles and drones off course and they take out buildings, and there are other times where they slam missiles directly into buildings. He's just come out of a meeting with Putin, obviously spoken to Putin about killing civilians, and he is already regurgitating a Putin talking point. This is, honestly, I just got shivers down my spine, but not from a good reason. Like, this is honestly a really important point. This is super, super important. I hadn't heard this.
A lot of points. I want to see people stop dying in Ukraine, and that's what's happening. We're losing 5, 6, 7,000. They're Russians, mostly Russians, and they're Ukrainian soldiers. There's some people dying in cities and towns where they're trying to blow up missile manufacturers and other things in some cities. I don't know if you know what's going on there, but there are a lot of people dying. And if we can end that war, it would be very.
So when they die, it's where they. He doesn't say where sometimes this happens or give any kind of nuanced qualification. He says civilians die where they're trying to hit missile manufacturing.
Good, and I was very happy to hear him say if I was president, that war would have never happened.
I was very happy to be massaged, my ego to be massaged by Putin. He was putty in Putin's hand, this man. Right, so Putin has offered American ExxonMobil return to Russian lucrative Sakhalin-1 oil project if the company lobbies against US sanctions. I wonder why sanctions aren't in place. Oh, ExxonMobil get a lucrative contract in Russia. I wonder why Russia didn't get any sanctions. I wonder why Trump didn't put any sanctions on Russia. The decree signed during Putin's Alaska meeting with Trump requires foreign investors to undertake actions to support the lifting of Western sanctions, according to the Euromaidan press. Exxon, which operated a 30% stake in the project, took a $4.6 million hit to exit Russia after the 2022 full-scale invasion, making it the only non-Russian partner to walk away. Russian oil prices have crashed from $100 to $55 a barrel since the full-scale war began. Oil profits helped fuel Russia's war crimes in Ukraine by sustaining its war economy. Earlier, Trump told Putin to focus on Russia's economy, which is currently in a bad state, rather than continue fighting. Max 25 reported last night that some Google services that were blocked in Russia have just started working, according to Russian media. It's all getting reversed. That relationship is normalized again, and Putin gets everything he wants. Now, the good news at the moment, and I won't go into the full details of this, but Harry Enton from CNN talks about the latest stats coming out. I forget who from. Is it YouGov? No, I don't know. Anyway, the Republican electorate, the Republican base, is now way more in support of more aid to Ukraine, or just in general. So does the US give Ukraine too much support? Now it's gone from 47% to 30%, and no has gone from 30% to 46%. In other words, it's really improved from a GOP point of view. These are Republican voters. And then it also 51% of Republicans now believe that the US should give more arms to Ukraine. So the majority of Republicans, again, finally, now believe that the US should give more arms to Ukraine. 30% is what the number was in March. It's now 51%. That's changed 21% since Trump has started getting harder on Putin. But then that switched all last night. And unfavourable view of Putin, the GOP 84%, independents 88%, Democrats 93%. So the people who most dislike Putin are Democrats, followed by independents, followed by the GOP. There's still 84% of the GOP see Putin unfavourably, but 16% feel differently. But at least there is a very large majority of Americans right across the political spectrum who are no fans of Putin. Okay, and that's enough from me. I'll keep you up to date as more takes place. I appreciate your support, and sorry that much of this was on the peace negotiations. A lot of the bandwidth has been strangled by this. There's very little news coming out from the front lines, hits and losses wise. So anyway, I thought I'd take the opportunity to discuss what took place last night, as it was that important. Take care. I'll speak to you soon.